In the first reading, one sees how the arm of the secular world and that of divine providence in the religious sphere were combined for the authority of the king of Persia helped to bring back the exiles and to have the temple rebuilt. As long as the Jews didn't interfere, and as long as they were submissive, they were respected in their individuality, and so was their culture and religion. In the feast of this day, one remembers the dedication of what actually had been originally a pagan temple, where these martyrs, Cosmas and Damian, were honoured. A Paleo-Christian basilica sprang up. It's near the Roman Forum, and the dedication took place under Pope Felix IV. He reigned from 526 to 530. At present, the feast is anticipated by one day, for the actual day would have been the 27th of September. But we honour in the West St. Vincent de Paul on that day. It would seem that they were twin brothers, the Algiroi, the ones who were moneyless, doctors who did not charge for their services, which carried on after their death because they healed also freely, miraculously, by interceding for the sick. These would have been in the area of Syria, and it would seem that they were martyred under Diocletian in 303. It's quite possible actually that other members of their family suffered too, notably 3 other siblings. And they are, along with Luke, the beloved physician, the evangelist himself, patrons of physicians, surgeons, and pharmacists, and their names are still mentioned in the Roman canon. I'm celebrated or concelebrated there in the church of St. Cosmas and Damian, which I used to pass on a daily basis when going to university at Rome. And it's still a place of quiet prayer with ancient mosaics typical of the time. The Pantocrator over the apse, the Almighty with his lambs at his feet. We are those lambs. And when one is in these ancient churches, one senses the power of the faith, the church, the sacramental grace that has been there ever since. We are part of something greater. And that same pattern emerges age after age of the providence of God using also secular power. The foundation, the refoundation of our own abbey in Italy was a case in point. A woman of the area died, bequeathing the terrain to the diocese, but wanting that it should be re-established as a monastery. And the Bishop of Montalcino looked around. The Olivetans nearby were approached, but they couldn't take it on. The advice was given him to look further afield and to go and ask in France, for there were a large number of Benedictine vocations. He went to Fontainebleau and talked with the abbot, Don Forgeron, who made quite a few foundations during his abbacy, I think about 5 at least. And he, at the time, was interested. They came to look at it. he and another priest I know from the community, but it was not suitable, for only the abbey church was intact, and they need a structure for a Benedictine monastery, the whole structure. But then something else happened. Don André, he was from the Premonstratensian Abbey of Monde. In the period after the council, was a little upset by the number of changes happening liturgically and so on in his own community, and was thinking of going to Fongombo, being transferred there, which hadn't changed things too much. And the abbot hesitated to take him, but he rather encouraged him to talk to this bishop, and he also encouraged the scouts, of which he was master, to do something with Père André as a community, a potential community, and to take up this offer. And that is what happened. With these young scouts, he came, and the bishop took care of them. He gave them an old motor car, and he took care of their needs. And eventually they got also the Abbey Church and the whole complex that went with it, restored precisely by state money. That was collaboration of the two, and it was big expense. Even professional expertise restoring frescoes on the wall, the roof had to be replaced, and so on. And so it was that we had that. But then we also had the supernatural intervening directly. I remember hearing testimonies of what had happened before all this, when there had been no community there for a long time, since it was closed in 1462, but it was still used occasionally for prayer and masses, and the wish had been to restore the old medieval crucifix and to take it then to a museum nearby. It was restored, but when it was removed from the abbey, the Lord did not allow that situation to carry on. He wanted that crucifix at the abbey, knowing of course that it would be reopened later in time. And the earth began to have a succession of tremors, little earthquakes between the abbey and where it was in the museum, I think at Montalcino. And the authorities understood that this was something that the Lord didn't want to happen, and they restored it, and the earth calmed down, and it is now still there at the abbey, at the end of the altar, facing east, and towards it we would celebrate in the morning. But then something similar happened recently when the community opted to go back to France at the offer of the order and to take up a large, practically vacant monastery in the south of France. They had, with this heat which has been pervading Europe recently, this terrible, terrible fire. And it was eating up all the beautiful green area around, all those trees, and getting closer and closer and closer to the abbey. And already it had managed to break off the electricity by burning the poles or the current between the centre and the monastery, and it was about to attack the abbey itself. But the Lord stopped it. Again, divine intervention directly, because that abbey is one of the gems of France, with precisely that combination also of the divine and human in its establishment, for it goes right back. It is connected also historically with royalty, for the whole of France prayed for a king, a successor, that is, a male heir, and the royal family had no heir, and this child was born. He was to be Louis XIV, Louis XIV. And they had prayed at Notre-Dame du Bon Remède, Our Lady of Good Remedy, an ancient sanctuary there, and that was the nucleus, and that was honoured then with royal money. But then the abbey grew, and actually they have a second church, so it's a gem. Again, it's an interesting combination of what happens, Providence using even royal money. Something similar happened also in England when the Third Empire collapsed. Napoleon III is buried with his son and eventually the Empress at Farnborough, and that became a glorious abbey. All this to say that the Lord uses all he can, and he's not short of means. When in Rome, when Kennetrop was in difficulty, one or two of the brethren I was studying with were hinting that it should be a good idea to be transferred to them at St. Michael's Abbey in California. It's a long way away and it didn't happen, but that's the case also in point, for they have just completed a glorious classical abbey with a beautiful abbey church dedicated to St. Michael the Archangel, not that far, of course, from the City of the Angels, Los Angeles. It's an indication of the Lord's means. And what we see in all these cases is that the Lord is given only the best. And that is something that we need to look at. Pope Benedict did say some years ago, possibly before he was actually even Supreme Pontiff, that one day the Church would be in a different situation, not enjoying the privileges that we know, and that therefore even the churches perhaps would not be usable as they are now. A smaller, poorer church, but more authentic. So while we have our churches, we need to be grateful for them. And remember also that they are extraterritorial, they do not belong to this earth. St. Faustina saw the guardian angels of the churches honouring her guardian angel as she passed, and saw how there was a protection over consecrated churches. And she was also given to understand the importance of a church. We need to behave very differently in the sacred precincts of the house of God, because there is a desecration taking place all over the Catholic world right now. We have forgotten that we need to be like Moses, taking off our sandals spiritually as we come to the house of God, for the ground on which we stand is holy ground. Ome care